let your dad do it.
Trust Jens. Oh, did you do it?
No.
All right. Well, what I did last week is I introduced you to the Jewish festivals, and that's what I want to do today, is go over them in more depth. And we finished Psalm 90, but I want to get into Psalm 113. And the reason is because, remember, we're studying the Psalmoi. This is, it's not Hebrew, it's Greek, because the name Psalms comes from the Greeks, from the Septuagint, LXX. We also know, and I've showed you this before, when do they add the, if you have appellation, is there anyone looking at 113? Is there any appellation? Is there any preface to it?
I don't see one.
None?
No.
We'll see that, yeah. Remember that we've seen that all those are added. So if it says a psalm by or of David, we don't know whether it means by, written by, or about David, or a psalm of or about Moses. But we've been looking to find the dates of the psalms, when they were dated approximately in history. We've seen that. Draw the line. We're going to look at that for Psalm 113. And what we're going to do right now is, I titled this, The Use of the Psalms in Jewish Practice. We're going to look at modern and ancient Jewish practice. But more important, in Psalms of most importance in Jewish practice are 113 to 118. Anybody want to take a guess why? 113 through 118 is called the Hallel. The Hallel. So, Mike, the word that we have today, the word of the day is Hallel, and I'll tell you what that means in a moment. I'll go back over that from last week. But 13 through 118 is a Hallel, and they're used extensively in Jewish practice. That is, for Jewish feast days, they do the whole Hallel, or parts of the Hallel. And I'm going to go over details about what they use and what they don't use. Very interesting, both how the Hallel is used and its intention. Now, the point of Hallel, and the reason it's so important, I'm going to give you the early part first, I guess. There was a time when Jesus was in the temple, you remember? And the high priest, he was there for Sukkot, and he was there for, we're going to see what he was there for. It's for the end of Sukkot. The last Sukkot is the Festival of Booths. Festival of Booths runs for, I think it's about a week, 7 days. I have to look at my notes. But the last day is a very special day because it's the cleansing of the altar. And on the cleansing of the altar, I think I've mentioned this to you before. John talks about this. It's in John. During the cleansing of the altar, they go to the pool of Sukkot, which is the pool of Siloam, which Sukkot is the pool that, and I'll talk about this more when we get to the 115th Psalm. But at the pool of Siloam, which was made by Hezekiah. So Hezekiah dug a pool so that dug a pool with a steady flow of water from the mountains. This is a pool that's in the south part of Jerusalem. So Jerusalem, you have the temple here, and you have the Tower of Antonia, which is the building that the Romans built, the Praetorium. Then you have the city of David, which is the Ophel. And then you have the pool of Shiloach, and below here, this is the Gehenna. Gehenna, which is that valley or area where they throw refuse, etc., etc. Right here is the Mount of Olives. On the other side of, I can't remember what this is called, but this is like a moat, basically a stream. It's also where refuse goes. The refuse from the temple water goes there. But in any case, the pool, Hezekiah built this pool, and he had a underground feed to it. Now, when he first did it, the water was called living because it came from mountain streams, and the water moved all the time. It was in motion. Well, in Jesus' time, the stream had been, this had been occluded, had been filled up with silt. And so it was no longer, it was seeping, but it was no longer living. But the water here, remember this is the pool where the people waited for the water to move. And when the water moved, they thought an angel had moved the water, and then they tried to put the people in it so they would be healed. Do you remember that? Yes. Okay? Because in the past, the water had moved all the time. It moved so much it was called living water. And so what had happened is in Hezekiah, past Hezekiah's time, what they had done is they had taken the water from the pool and gone up to the temple with it at this day, the last day of Sukkot, the last day of the Festival of Booths. And this is a day that the temple, that the altar was cleansed. And the way it was, okay, during Sukkot, what they did is they washed the altar. There was no, during Sukkot, there is no sacrifices offered on the altar at all. No sacrifices in the temple. What they're doing at this time is they're cleaning off all the refuse, all the ashes, all the bones and yuck and everything from the altar. And they wash it down so it's completely clean. And then at the last day, they take the water from the pool of Shiloach, and they go, and the priest brings it all the way up to the altar, and then he pours it out on the altar. This is so important that Josephus tells us, and I can't not tell you this story, this is a great story. Josephus tells us that a priest who acts it either accidentally or intentionally, I don't know why he would intentionally do it, but he accidentally missed getting it on the altar, and the crowd tore him to pieces. Ripped them apart. That's how important it was to the people. During this ceremony, the last part of the Hallel, 118, is said. And anyone know what the last part of the Hallel is? Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And at that point, by the way, it's blessed is he who comes in the name of Yahweh. And this is the only time, and I'm going to get into this, this is the only time that we know that the high priest, according to Josephus, pronounced the name of God in front of the people. All the other times when he pronounced the name of God, it was like, brr. But when he said it, this is the only time, once a year, that the name of God was said before the people. And when he said it, what did the people do? They, in awe, fell down on their knees. Do you remember when they came to get Jesus? And in Mark, and they said, we are searching, who are you looking for? And they said, we're looking for Jesus, the son of Joseph from Nazareth. And he said, I am. And what did the people do? What did they do? They fell on their knees. Because scholars believe, many believe that he said, not I am in Greek, ego eimi, but yet he said, Yahweh. And the reason that the author didn't quote him, why?
They couldn't.
Because the reason you can't quote him, there's two reasons. Number one, you can't pronounce it. He pronounced it correctly, which was one of the blasphemies, one of the things to put him in court for. Another thing is, how do Orthodox Jews write God today? G-D. Because they don't say the name of God. Why? And I'm going to get into this. What's the big deal?
It's holy.
It depends on what you think the fourth commandment says. Fourth commandment, don't take the name of the Lord's name in vain. That's not exactly what it says in Hebrew. We like to think King James is the last word, right? It actually says in Hebrew, don't, or the second commandment, which, well, it depends on what you're looking at Deuteronomy or Exodus. It says, do not say the name of God. And the implication is don't say the name of God for any unimportant reason. So therefore, if it is a sin to say the name of God for no important reason, then what would you do?
Don't take a chance.
Don't take a chance. You don't say it. So like I said, in Josephus' time, which is also the time of Christ, the high priest only said the name of God one time. And by the way, it's become so endemic, or it became such a big deal, that today we do not know what the correct pronunciation of Yahweh is. Of, loosely, YW, YH. That's the consonants. Notice there's no vowels, right? We don't know how it's supposed to be pronounced. The Masoretes didn't know how to pronounce it. In fact, the Masoretes didn't even do it. What did the Masoretes do? Masoretes wrote it like this with consonants, and then left out the vowels. And what did the vowels spell? Adonai. Adonai. Those are the vowels for Yahweh. And supposedly if you put them together, you get Yahweh. But we don't know. We don't know. We have no idea. Because we've lost pronunciation. So, at that time, the 118th Psalm, that's the last of Hallel. At that time, when they pour the water, after they pour the water over, they say, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of Yahweh." All the people bow down, and what do they wait for?
That person.
They wait for the person who was sent in the name of Yahweh, who is the Messiah, to announce himself in the temple. And according to John, what did Jesus Christ do? He stood up and he said, "I am the water of life, I have living water." What was he alluding to?
The pool of Sukkot.
He was referring to the fact that they no longer had living water, right? And therefore, he would provide. Isn't this interesting? The theological implications are great. I don't want to talk about them. The historical is amazing. Because when you put this together in your minds, Jesus, it's really funny to me. Brown, I hate bringing him up because maybe go look at it and read his stuff. Don't pay money for it. Basically, you get it for free. But, Dan Brown is probably the worst scholar known to man or God, but he's made a lot of money off of it. That's pretty interesting. Because he's made comments, they didn't think Jesus was Messiah, Jesus, the church didn't believe he was God, la, 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 la. But we see over and over again in the Greek, we see this is an exact example where Jesus did exactly what the rabbis and the Talmudic documents said would happen. And also what Josephus said would happen, according to the Hebrew scholars, and what they were waiting for. What does Brown miss? Obviously. Well, the cultural impact.
Now, Jesus wasn't hiding.
Yeah, he misses the cultural impact of the time. Because if you know anything about the culture, and this is what I get at, right? If you know anything about the Hebrew culture and you read John, what should pop out at you? Right? I mean, this guy stands up exactly when they expected the Messiah to stand up and announces, "I have," what would you expect the Messiah to say? Right? I mean, isn't this astounding? This pool has not bubbled for how many hundreds of years? And they bring the water to cleanse the altar? And what does the Messiah say? "I have living water." Which is also what he said in John 2.
The Samaritan woman.
The Samaritan woman, the prostitute from Samaria, right? Yeah.
It just seems ironic. So these guys have been waiting thousands of years. Probably, he says what he says, and then they wait in silence for someone to respond. Well, finally Jesus responds, but it doesn't seem like they're all of a sudden, "Oh, good, it's the Messiah."
Well, yeah. I guess, yeah, the wrong
response they get in 1,000 years, and they don't listen to it.
Well, what's really funny is not only that, but what did they do? The high priest said that wanted the temple guard to go arrest him. The temple guard was afraid to. Well, you can see what they're thinking, right? What are the temple guard are Levites, right? They're Levites. So what is the temple guard thinking?
What if he's Messiah?
This guy's a Messiah. And they're thinking also, remember, not long ago, what did they do to somebody who interrupted or messed up this service?
They killed
The
him.
people ripped them apart, right? One of the priests. So, what are they thinking? They're going to tear us up. This is not a positive thing, because think about this. There's 1 million people at the end of Sukkot. There's the 3 pilgrim festivals, which we're going to talk about. One of them is Sukkot, the festival of booths. So during the pilgrim festival, how many people do we think may have been in Jerusalem in the ancient period? Up to 1 million. Up to 1 million people. Now remember, how large is Jerusalem according to, I told you this before, if you've been in my other classes, you know this. But we know because there were censuses done. There's 2 censuses done. How many people do we think were in Jerusalem? Normally.
20,000?
20,000. Remember, you know, we think cities, big cities, what? 7 million, right? Wichita's got, 300-something thousand? We think big, right? In the ancient world, a big city was 20,000 people. Jerusalem was a large city. Rome, Rome, we don't know, maybe 100,000 people, maybe less, in all the environs. You know, big cities aren't big cities in the ancient world. We think they are, but they're not that large. And so the real big thing that's important to note here, there's 1 million people out there in that temple area. So a big chance for not goodness to happen, especially if you're out trying. And remember, they all went down on their knees, and Jesus stood up. He's the only person standing in the crowd. You know, he's an obvious marker. Do you have a question, David?
Yeah, did I understand you to say that they went down on their knees until they were expecting to hear that he was announced?
They went down on their knees, and now we don't know exactly how this went. We're guessing. Edersheim has some really interesting observations about it from the Talmudic sources, but nobody knows. It's like trying to repeat. Remember, I told you this before. Could you take our prayer book and repeat our service? It'd be impossible, wouldn't it? You'd have to get our prayer book. You'd have to get our hymn book. We call it hymn book, but it's a prayer book. You have to get our hymn book. You have to get our worship notes, our Holy Cross, Life and Holy Cross, right? Then you have to see a video, wouldn't you? Of what was, or an audio or a video or both of what was going on to be able to put together a service. How many videos do we have from the ancient world? How many audios? Right? I mean, and people, how many printings do we have of like their bulletins? They didn't have any, right? As a matter of fact, did people read? No. They had mnemonics. So what we consider reading is really different than what they did in the ancient world. So if you put all that together, you can see that although we don't really know how it worked, we believe that when they went down on their knees and waited for the Messiah to show himself, the high priest would wait for a certain period of time, and then he would indicate to the Levites who played the instruments, and they would start the instruments up again, and then the high priest would complete the 118th Psalm. But I'm going to wait to do the 118th Psalm till later. The reason I want to tell you this, what do you think? What's the reason? Why do I want to tell you this about the Hallel? Because I want you to see how important it is. It's not just important in Jewish thought, it's also important in Christian thought. Although we don't do much with the Hallel. So let's talk about the Hallel. Let's talk about the point of the Hallel. The word of the day is Hallel. Remember, I told you, Hallel does not mean what you think it means. Hallel means literally, and I got in the notes here, it means literally clear as in sound, or clear as in color. So what's that got to do with, like, praise? Does that mean praise? This is a word that really cannot be translated easily in English. Because obviously what it means is something like clearness. Clearness. How important do you think this is as a word to the Hebrew people? Must be very important. Because not only is it the beginning, it's the beginning word of these Psalms. Remember at Ruth, and I told you, the first word that you find in Hebrew uses a very important word, and the first word in Ruth is famine. Famine. The first word in the Hallel, 113, almost the first word in every one of the Psalms in the Hallel is Hallel. That's where it gets its name, Hallel. But Hallel isn't a praise, doesn't really mean praise, although that's what we translate it to be. It doesn't mean blessed. It means clear, as in sound or color. Clear, as in sound and color. Do you see culturally? I mean, if nothing else, this should immediately tell you how far culturally is Hebrew from English, American, Western culture. That's a ginormous rift between the two. Because we've got to really stretch our minds to be able to figure out what this word means, just by itself. There's more to it than that, but we'll get into that. So, Hallel. Now, I want to really quickly go over a couple of things here. I want to talk about the Jewish calendar. Let's start with the very first one, Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is the Jewish New Year, and I've got it on your notes in the bottom here. This is the beginning of their year. It's first Tishri. Now, the date there, if you want to write it, I didn't leave the annotation, but that's for 2011, basically. So September 19th, I think that's 2010, was first Tishri, because it moves. Because, all right, I don't think I've talked about this, but does anybody know what is Jewish calendar based on? Lunar. You have a question here, Nick?
Yes. I look at all of these festivals and all of these holidays, and if people are expected to participate in all these, when do they have time to make a living? I mean, it seems like they're traveling to the temple and then traveling back to their homes and then just getting ready to turn around and go traveling again because there's so many. Don't know. It's like all they do is festival time. And
Well,
Party.
no, go ahead. I just thought, boy, if you're going to be a Jew in this particular time frame, you're spending a lot of time in all these festivals.
well, I did leave in, and I don't think you were here last week, but I did leave in the modern holidays, the modern Jewish holidays, just because. So I left in Holocaust Remembrance and Jewish Independence Day. I left in Jerusalem Day. I think that's the only three. Although I did leave in the older festivals too. So I put in all the modern and the ancient festivals. In the most ancient times, there were only 6 festivals. There was 3 pilgrim feasts and 3 non-pilgrim feasts. And so, and remember, these people worked 6 days a week. They're probably the only people in the world who didn't work 7 days a week in the ancient world, because they took Shabbat off. And then, when they traveled, and this is really interesting because we saw it in the lesson today, although the pastor didn't talk much about it. In the period, what you could do is you could exchange your stuff, not for money, for basically, this is proto-money. There's no money in the Old Testament. Okay, very clear about this. No money until 600 BC. There's no money at all, and there's no money at all in the Old Testament because it had not enveloped into the period. Because remember, when's the end of the Old Testament period?
430 something.
432, and Lydia 600 BC was money, and so you only have like 232 years between the two, and money had not come to the Palestinian area yet. It was very unique. So they had proto-money, and what you could do is you could exchange your goods for proto-money at the time, and then take it to the temple, and what you did was you would then exchange your proto-money for temple goods. And by the way, that's what ended up in Jesus' time with what?
Money changer.
Yeah, well, they call them money changers, which really aren't money changers per se. They were the buyers and sellers in the temple because they had the official temple goods. So what it had become is a great monopoly for the priests and the Levites. Because remember, I told you before, when is the only time you find lambs in Bethlehem? In Passover, because whose lambs are they?
Temples.
They're the Levites' lambs that they're going to sell to people that are the lambs without spot or blemish, because they're official lambs, right? They got this stamp on them, FDA approved, or temple approved, whatever they got, right? But those are the only lambs you can buy, because if you bring your lamb in, what are they going to say?
Not good.
Oh, no, there's a spot. There's a blemish. You say, well, there's a big spot on this one. Oh, it's approved, it's okay, it's got a waiver, right? It's got a waiver. So, this is the way it worked. It's a pretty good setup. But in the time of Christ, that's what happened. But that was allowed by Moses, by the Torah, for them to do that. And so, that made it easier because you didn't have to take your whole flocks, right? You could take proto-money, usually silver or gold, to the temple area and then exchange it for, well, you basically gave it to the priests. And they would, hopefully they would do it, right? In Samuel's time, what do you think?
They weren't.
Remember his sons?
Yeah.
They were probably taking the money and then doing what? It's like, woo, right?
Yeah.
But theoretically, they would take that proto money, the gold and silver, and then buy sacrificial animals to give as sacrifices. But who knows? You know, obviously I don't think that was happening. In any case, in Rosh Hashanah, and that's the beginning of the year, September. And do you notice, when do the Jews start their year?
You said September.
What does that indicate, though?
Winter?
Harvest. Which is very interesting. Because we start our year. Why do we start our year when we start our year? What's the basis?
Into the calendar. The calendar.
What's the basis for the calendar?
The rotation of the Earth around the sun.
Is it Roman with the is it an origins with the Roman calendar? Is that, as I recall, I'm digging a little bit.
Yeah, it's Roman. It's based Roman Greek. Roman Greek. But why? Why pick that? Okay. If you remember back, why do we have the days of the week named the way we have our days of the week?
The Roman gods.
The Roman gods. Now, why do we have dawn and dusk the way we have dawn and dusk? Or why do we do day and night the way we do day and night? Remember, how did the Hebrews do it?
Night and day.
It's opposite, right? It's the way we do it. What is the deal? Remember?
The Egyptians worship the sun.
Because the Egyptians worshiped the sun, and so did the Romans and Greeks, because they worshiped the heavenly bodies. The Hebrews did not worship what?
Sun.
Any other gods?
The heavenly bodies, at least, you know, as far as Moses in that period, right? We don't know really Abraham and those other guys. We know that they trusted in Yahweh. Well, actually, didn't. When did Yahweh announce his name as Yahweh? Who did he announce that to? To Moses. So remember, you know, Ur of the Chaldees, what did the Ur of the Chaldees worship?
No.
The moon. It's just things for thinking, because what did Abraham probably worship along with God? You know, we don't know if he's a monotheist. Well, no. You know, maybe he transitioned that way, but you know that he was the first. Remember, I told you the whole world, pagan world, believe. You know, the whole concept of paganism from animism is many gods, and so to have a monotheistic culture is not just rare; it's unique. It's one of a kind. See, the only place you find monotheism is, well, before Mysterion, is in Judeo and then Christian. Oh, that's it. Period up. In the world. Didn't exist anywhere else. It did exist for a very short time in Egypt under Tutankhamun. For 2 generations. But remember what I told you before, where did that come from?
The Jews.
Well, I say that too as a historian. I think it came from the Jews. But you see, a lot of historians argue the opposite. You see? That the Jews got their idea from Tutankhamun. Now, I find that hard to believe, but anyway. You know, like I said, we've been over those arguments before, and they're pretty interesting to look at. But in any case, the reason that we start the year in January, is because we base our calendar on the movement of the sun and the planets. The Jewish people base their calendar solely on, you want to take a guess?
The moon.
Not moon. The seasons. So they're basing it specifically on the seasons. Now, why pick that? I don't know. Cultural vagary, just a choice, you know, whatever. Why pick that specific time? It's in the Torah. It's the beginning of the year. God picked it for him. According